Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I'm your host, Mike Allen. Where were you on September 11th, 2001, the date the World Trade Centers were attacked? Well, our guest today, Connecticut's John Maher, was on a photo shoot as an independent cameraman when longtime client CBS News called him urgently and asked to hire him for a month specifically to cover the worst attack on the U.S. in its history. His story is going to leave you speechless and emotional. John will be along in just a moment with his memories. This week's trivia question: when this Connecticut group thought the world was going to end in 1873, where in the state did they go to get prepared? Stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you've got the topic for next week's show. Everybody has their 9/11 story, where they were and what they were doing. But I can guarantee you few are like the story you're going to hear today. Our guest today still has breathing difficulties from that incident because he actually filmed footage from inside one of the fallen towers just 4 days after the attack, while the toxic soot and airborne particulates were still thick and floating everywhere in Ground Zero. John Maher is an incredibly talented filmmaker and cameraman, an independent freelancer who, at the time, was available for hire by TV networks and private clients alike. He's retired now, but it was a call from the CBS television network that got him connected to this story in a manner that, frankly, you're not going to believe. How he got to and inside the fallen tower from his home with his family in Redding, Connecticut, is by itself a remarkable tale, but the memories he still carries with him today are simply haunting. John, I think like everybody, you were no different than any other human being on 9/11. You had no idea what was going on. You're in New Haven. You're on another shoot at Yale University. What happened? How did you hear about it?
Yeah, I was working as director of photography for a company called Moving Pictures, a longtime client, and we were interviewing the president of Yale, I think Rick Levin. We were setting up a pre-light in his conference room when my pager went off, and it was a New York City number. And interestingly enough, we had a little code that if it was urgent, people would put 911 after their number. This is way before 9/11 was a thing, of course, but it was indicated it was an urgent call. And then I got another page from a New York number, and I knew it was one of the networks. And so I gave my pager to the PR guy, and I said, listen, just call them back and say, I'm available the rest of the week, and I'll get back to them later. And he came back and said, well, your pager isn't working. I said, Jim, try again, will you? And he comes back and says, the phones aren't working to New York. Something's happened in New York, was the line he used. Something's happened in New York.
Now, this is before 12 noon on
Oh, yeah,
the
this
11th.
is approximately 9:30. I started to get pager calls. We continued to pre-light, and then the sirens started to go off in New Haven. It turns out that I think one of the president's daughters or someone connected with the White House was attending Yale. Again, no one knew exactly what was happening. At that point, representative of the president of Yale came in and said, listen, we got to break this off. We're going to have a conference in this room, so you guys need to clear out. So at that point, I asked my crew to get the camera ready for what we call run and gun, which is going with batteries and wireless hops to the audio and fresh tape, because we didn't know what was going on.
So people who have never been in journalism or media like you and I have both been don't truly understand what happens at a time like this. The reality is you're just a person whose job it is to take video footage and record it as best you can of what you're seeing. And when somebody asks you to go to a site and do that, you have to use all your senses to figure out, okay, what am I supposed to be taking video of? Now, they sent you to Stamford Hospital. Why did they send you there?
Well, what happened was, you kind of run into a thing where you switch from having a kind of a rather genteel pre-light in a very controlled, nice environment where you have control of the room and the way it's being set up to suddenly something's happening outside of our little realm here, and we have to get ready for it. So after we kind of crashed the whole Yale project, at that point my wife is calling me and saying, I have two daughters, Catherine and Carrie, and so we made a quick plan while we had signal that I was to go to Milford to pick up Carrie, and my wife was going to go right home, pick up Catherine, and everybody was going to meet home. And I started to get all these pages from the networks and settled on CBS. I actually got a call from ABC, and they said, can we put you on hold for tomorrow? And I said, no. You either hire me right now or, gotta go. Saw CBS come up, which was one of my favorite clients, and they got on and said, can we hire you for a month? And I said, yes, you can. Well, we don't know what we're doing yet, but they just said, head south. So I relinked with Jeff Hayash, my sound guy, and we headed to Stanford Hospital, where we eventually were assigned.
Now, just to backtrack for a second, so where along this timeline did somebody actually pull you aside and say, John, planes have run into the World Trade Center?
Well, we knew that at Yale while we were in the pre-light because we kept hearing rumors. Something was going on, something about planes. And at one point I broke away and went into another room, and there was a small TV set, and I saw the second tower go down, collapse. So we were aware that there was some big doings in New York City fairly early, by 9:30, I would say, or 10 o'clock.
So now CBS sends you and your sound man down to Stanford Hospital, and the idea there is that this is going to be an airlift location from New York City for survivors to come for treatment, right?
Yes, they were expecting an overload from the New York City hospitals for what they thought were going to be hundreds of survivors and casualties to come in. They had taken a parking lot and sawed off the light stanchions so they could land helicopters closer to the building. So that had already happened by the time we arrived, and then no one showed up.
So now this is still September 11th, Tuesday.
Correct.
The next day, the 12th, now things change a little bit. You get a new assignment?
Well, I got a call from the CBS News desk to say, we can't get you into New York. This would have been for the 12th because it was still closed off. But we want you to produce and shoot some kind of story in Connecticut for us and then send it by satellite link from Stanford down to New York. So I had a good relationship with the Bishop of Bridgeport, and we had done some things together. So I called his office and said, can we follow Bishop Laurie around to different families and counseling them? And they were thrilled to have that opportunity, as we were. And so we set it up for a 10 o'clock meet the next day, which would have been the 12th. I was happy that, quite frankly, we didn't have to go into the city and would be on our own and could kind of do our thing without too much interference from anyone. So,
well, that happiness didn't last, though, because you ended up in the city. Tell us this story about how you got down there. This is an unbelievable story.
Well, sometime later on the evening of the 11th, I got a call from someone at CBS saying, we need to get you into New York. And I said, well, I already have an assignment given to me by the desk. And he said, I'm above the desk. I said, okay. So they got us on a special train that was leaving Stanford. This would be the morning of the 12th, to come in with some medical personnel and rescue workers that were going in. It was a very strange trip in. Normally you go in with commuters with their briefcases and suits, and here we are with first responders coming in, actually. And so Jeff and I packed up tons of batteries, tons of videotape, and went on this train to Grand Central.
When did you do the filming with the bishop? Was that the morning of the 12th?
Never happened. It was scheduled for the morning of the 12th, and I had to call them back and apologize and told them we got reassigned.
So you get to Grand Central, and it's ringed by authorities, right?
It's ringed with troops, just literally shoulder to shoulder, National Guard. And since we were not trying to get in, we were trying to get out from the train, they allowed us through, and we started walking towards the CBS headquarters on the west side.
There was supposed to be somebody there to pick you up, though?
What happened was, again, the cell service was not very good at all. So Jeff and I just decided, let's just walk towards CBS and see what we find. And very shortly after, a big, long, white truck with the CBS eye on the side came by, and the guy yelled out, "Are you Maher?" And I said, "Yeah, come get in." And it was a guy from the CBS stationary supply section of the company that was recruited to pick us up and take us towards what was called the forward satellite position. We could only get down to about Canal Street, and we parked the vehicle, and the CBS guy said, "I'm going back to headquarters." I said, "No, you're going to help us carry all this stuff down." Jeff and I and this fella dragged ourselves down the West Side Highway, not too far to where there was a gaggle forming of press people that were being organized by the police, and said, "You're going to walk in a group down the West Side Highway, but if anyone strays out of this line, they will be arrested."
Now, do you have a feeling at this point in time, I mean, with everything you're seeing around you and the smoke billowing up at this point, you're seeing everything. Does it feel like Armageddon to you?
Yeah, it felt, well, it was a strange combination, Mike, of something unusual happening overlaid with your kind of regular day-to-day job mode. You know, we were still working with our own equipment and our own sensibilities about shooting a project, but this was something unusual.
So, as a former journalist myself, and you doing the work you've done over the years, you hate to put it this way, but there are certain assignments where you kind of go, okay, I've done this before, and, you hate to say it, but maybe a murder. There's no script for this.
As one of the producers at CBS said, this is everything. The scope of it was so huge that you were trying to find a little handle, a little doorway into it that you could report. Just really trying to keep your stamina up as part of it is just keep working hour after hour. It turns out at this time that part of the West Side Highway was being rebuilt, so there was a lot of construction equipment and dirt piles all over the place. And we came upon a Winnebago that was rakishly parked sort of sideways, partially tilted over in the middle median down at this forward satellite position. And I found out later that they just drove it as far as they could, and it stalled up on this rise of dirt, and that was it. Okay, that's where we're going to be. And then to the south of the Winnebago trailer, closer to ground zero, there were a number of easy-up tents set up for these live, what they call hits or live reports, where a reporter could stand and you would have the smoke and everything over your shoulder.
Amazing that you have to even think this way, but this is the coverage of 9/11. I mean, this is just what you had to do. I found this very interesting when you first got to the Winnebago and you kind of wanted to go inside and take a break from all the air particulates and whatnot that you were facing. They asked you if you were with 60 Minutes?
Yeah, as in most companies, the networks are broken up into fiefdoms. And the lady running the truck said, "Are you with 60 Minutes?" And I said, "Well, I think we were with 48 Hours, but, if you're not with 60 Minutes, you got to get out of the satellite truck." And I said, "Well, my understanding is that there's no longer shows. It's all 9/11 coverage." And I said, "If you want to call the desk to verify that, you can, but we're sitting down for a minute." So that little kerfuffle kind of passed.
Now, how did you get your first bite to eat?
One of the odd images I have of the morning of the 12th was through the smoke, I saw a chef's hat coming down towards us. Literally, my first image was this chef's hat, and it was a fella, apparently a chef, pushing a large cart, impossibly large cart, over this dirt that had all kinds of sandwiches and water and respiratory masks on it. And it was a CBS guy who was assigned by the network to bring it down. He told me, "Are you the CBS guy here?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay, all this stuff is just for CBS employees." I said, "Right." And off he went and left us with all this treasure. And Jeff and I immediately distributed it to all our friends at the other networks that were there. And so everybody got water and sandwiches. We spent a number of hours, actually, at this little video village that was kind of overlooking Ground Zero. until we finally got an assignment way across town over on the east side. So Jeff and I commenced to hike across what was called the exclusion zone. I was wearing my boots and my cowboy boots. I had the wrong type of sock. So Jeff is a hiker, so he said, no, you're going to have trouble. You got to get the right socks. So there were a number of abandoned companies that had just been looted, a state of dishevelment. And I remember stopping at a Rite Aid pharmacy and went in, and all kinds of water had been taken. It was completely abandoned, stuff all over the floor. And I found a pair of socks that Jeff okayed. They said, this is good for the boots. And I left $5 in a little note and put the socks on outside. And then we were able to hike towards the east side and do our assignment. So that was the 12th.
Now, the 14th is a big day for you because this is now Friday. It's 4 days after the towers have come down, and you get the what I consider to be unbelievable assignment of having to go inside ground zero, actually in what's left of the buildings, the base. Just unbelievable. Tell us that story.
Well, we had worked all day. Richie and I had spent a lot of time, I believe it was in Brooklyn, at one of the mosques, and these folks were really just heartbroken of what had happened and felt terrible about the feelings a lot of people had about Muslims at that point. We actually even got a call. I got a cell communication from somebody at CBS saying that there were people driving around in pickup trucks, that there was a possibility that the mosque would be bombed, and just a tremendous number of rumors flying everywhere. So we wrapped that, I think, 4 or 4:30, and I actually headed home because I really hadn't been home much, or when I got home it was just to sleep, and my family was kind of upset about everything that had gone on. So I headed back to Connecticut. Richie stayed in the city, and I got a call from Catherine Kent at the desk saying, would you be willing to go into ground zero tonight? And I said, I got a really early day tomorrow. We were getting calls from NBC wanting us to work with them. We agreed that we would work Saturday and Sunday with NBC and then go back to CBS on Monday. And I said, gee, I got a 10 o'clock call with somebody else Saturday morning. So I turned her down. And I'm driving home and I'm thinking about this. And I think, why am I missing this opportunity to cover this huge part of the story? So I called her back and I said, is that still available, that assignment? She says, oh yeah, are you willing to go? I said, yeah, I will. She said, well, get back here as soon as you can. And I went home, just saw the family briefly. I got some heavy-duty coveralls from my neighbor who was a fireman, just so I would kind of be ready for whatever was down there, and headed back. And met at CBS with those folks, and went in around 11:30 that night.
So let's go through this. So how did you get down there, and how did you, I assume, get past the police presence?
There were just a number of rumors flying around all during this time. Word had come through a contact at CBS who had a contact in some security agency that said there was a report that some of the terrorists were going to try to get back into Ground Zero to see their handiwork on Friday night. And I had never heard that before or since. And so that just sort of added to the strangeness of Friday evening. There was a producer, Rebecca Liss, who was kind of had the nickname Miss Ground Zero because she was the lady that was in charge of the Winnebago at the forward satellite position. And she was kind of probing the perimeter that by that time was very much a crime scene, and it was being administered by the FBI and FEMA. So we linked up with Rebecca and started to move towards kind of the perimeter of Ground Zero. There were 3 levels you had to get through. The first level, because we had our credentials, we got through easily. Rebecca was allowed to go into the second level because she had to deliver sandwiches and batteries to a crew that was up on a high-rise building looking down at Ground Zero, and they hadn't had any reinforcements for a number of hours. And they said they needed food and batteries urgently. Batteries more than food, the guy said. So we delivered batteries and food, sandwiches to that crew. And that got us to the second ring. And the third ring was the one that was the last place where they checked you at Chambers and Broadway, right by City Hall. And Rebecca was having a tremendous trouble with her eyes. She was getting a lot of particulate matter in her eyes, and she was just streaming, crying from just the tears of trying to keep her eyes clear. And there was a Red Cross eye wash station right at that corner. So she said, hang here for a second, and I'm going to go see if I can't get some help with my eyes. Technically, we did not have credentials beyond that second checkpoint. But I said, if I can get in on my own, are you okay with that? She said, absolutely, just go for it if you can. So when she was at the eye wash station, I noticed this little trailer had been set up for the Red Cross right on the sidewalk between the road and the City Hall fence on the corner of Chambers and Broadway. Just to the west of that was the actual road, and there was a heavy-duty military and police checkpoint there. We didn't want to risk that. And I just noticed there was a little gap between the trailer and the fence. And I just said, I'm going. And I slid down through there and started to walk down Broadway.
How did you feel at that point?
Oh, my heart was pounding because it was just such a strange zone to be in. The vibe was just unearthly, really. I just kept walking, and there's a point where you realize you're in the bubble, and anybody that sees you says, well, he's there, I'm here, we're officially allowed to be here, and you don't ask questions. So I think it's the whole idea of just walking forcefully ahead without making eye contact. I could see the huge emergency lights ahead and the smoke kind of headed down Broadway towards VC Street, where I actually turned.
And so what was your number one objective? When did you start saying, I've got to start rolling my camera? Or was it rolling the whole time?
Oh, no. I waited. But I have to tell you a strange thing, which I haven't really told too many people about, happened on Broadway shortly after I passed through what I call that checkpoint bubble. As I was walking down there, I noticed on the other side of the road a large Humvee type vehicle parked. And I thought, oh, okay. But I noticed there were people in it. And I started to diagonally cross the road to look closer. And I noticed it was full of mannequins. There were soldier mannequins inside this vehicle. I thought, oh. So I moved a little closer, got to within about 5 or 6 feet of this vehicle, and I saw 6 soldiers sitting there, and it just hit me. Those aren't mannequins. These are some kind of a SWAT team or SEAL team, and they're in what they call insect mode. They're just sitting. They didn't look at me. They weren't moving. They were just in some kind of standby mode. At that point, I said, I got to get away from here. I didn't film it. I just moved quickly away. It just was so weird and so odd. And I actually did a little research on it, and apparently that level of what you call SEAL team or SWAT group, they have a thing, and I know the exact word for it is insect mode, which is that they are able to slow down their heart rate and their focus. They just sit for as long as they need to until they're called. And apparently this is what these guys, there were 6 of them, all in SWAT type uniform, just sitting straight ahead.
How bizarre.
Yeah, it was bizarre. That moment of thinking, why would there be mannequins in this vehicle? And then realizing, oh, these are soldiers.
So you had quite a few interesting views that night. That was one of them. And you then eventually get to the actual Tower 1, Tower 2, where...
Well, I got down I think I went down Broadway to Vesey, where I took a right turn towards Ground Zero. And there, the first thing I shot was people had drawn little expressions, little messages in the dust on the windows of a building that was just, it was still standing, but it was just blasted with dust and debris, smoke, haze etched into these windows. And there were things like City of Heroes and a number of expressions. So I filmed that, and then I was kind of hesitant to go further towards Ground Zero because we technically did not have authorization to be there, and I just did not want to get detained before I even got anything shot. So I hesitated, and then I said, I gotta get going. So then I went in and just started shooting.
So you were in, did you go like down or up, or was there any opportunity to move off the level that you were at when you went in?
For the first time since the attack, it rained on Friday, significant rain, and all that water had seeped down into the lower levels below where the World Trade Center towers were, into the parking garage. And apparently there were hundreds of cars still burning down there, the tires and the brake linings atomizing and coming up with the smoke. So it was a very, very spooky night.
Now, you have suffered from inhalation that evening. You were given a respirator, but the respirator design prevented you from actually using it and doing your job, correct?
Yeah, I was able to use it on and off, but to actually shoot with it, I couldn't because I couldn't see the viewfinder. There was a big respirator can on my right side that prevented me from looking at the viewfinder properly of the camera. And the other thing is it was fogging up my glasses. So I just had to take it off occasionally to get the shots I needed. I don't think anyone realized at that time how toxic that witch's brew was coming up. The odd thing about going into Ground Zero was once you get through that exterior perimeter, you can't see anything but Ground Zero. I think it was about 16 acres of destruction, but because of the smoke and the haze and the darkness that night, you were totally inside that experience. And it's hard to believe. I'm in New York City, and the smell was kind of the odd smell of New York, which the base smell of New York City for me was always a stale cigar smoke. But combined with that was this horrible electrical fire, the smell of a terrible electrical fire, and then something else overlaid on that. And I'll never forget the smell of Ground Zero. And then the crunching under your feet, the glass and the dust. Another thing that was happening Friday night, Mike, was they had switched from search and rescue to search and recovery. It finally was dawning on everyone that they weren't going to get anybody else out. And these cadaver dogs were barking excitedly about going in to try to find people, try to do their work. And I noticed a number of these dogs getting ready to go in. And of course, they didn't find anyone alive at that point on Friday night. So I was just shooting along, and I got a rather firm tap on my shoulder. And I thought, okay, this is it. They've caught me. And I turned, and here was this fireman right from Central Casting. He had the bunker gear on, the walkie-talkie, the helmet and everything. He says, if you want some real pictures, come with me. So I thought, okay. For one thing, walking with a fireman validated my being in the bubble. And we walked down deeper into what they call the pit at that time, and up the escalator, which had obviously just not working, but you could walk up the escalator. And to my left was the daycare center that had been abandoned after the first plane hit. The daycare workers had the foresight to get the children out before the second plane hit. And I filmed that. The idea of seeing the cribs covered in ash, the little high chairs that the kids had their snacks in, was haunting.
We've talked about your family here several times.
Mm-hmm.
How did they respond to what you did?
My 7-year-old daughter said, "Dad, they knocked our 2 front teeth out." And I thought, wow, from a 7-year-old, they knocked our 2 front teeth out. And after looking at the daycare center, we were up on this higher level, I noticed some smoke and haze in the distance and walked over to where some rescue workers were standing. As we got further into ground zero, there was a place near where the North Tower fell that a tree still stood, and you could see it through the smoke and haze, and it was just an eerie sight. And rescue workers were looking in that area, but they were looking above the tree into the haze and smoke. And I'm not a terribly spiritual or mystical guy, but there was a presence there. There was a sense that all those souls were asking, what should we do? It happened so fast. Should we go up to heaven or come back down? What should we do? And there was a charge in the air, almost like after an electrical storm, or during an electrical storm, a thunderstorm. And there was a presence there. And that's all I can say about it. But the people that were the workers had kind of come up there to meditate during the night, I think. And that's what we saw.
John's footage was shown the next morning on the CBS television network. It was also featured that Sunday evening on the longtime CBS news program 60 Minutes, although John himself didn't get to see it because he was busy working at that point for NBC. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. John was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis following his 9/11 coverage, for which he's receiving medical care at Yale New Haven Health, and which requires him to travel with an oxygen tank in tow. The work of brave journalists like John don't often get the proper thanks and recognition. They're the ones who document the sights and sounds that make up what we call news, and without it, frankly, we'd all be very poorly informed. So I want to thank our guest for today's program, John Maher, owner of JEM Films. He's a highly skilled independent film producer who now lives in central Connecticut with those memories of 9/11. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, when this Connecticut group thought the world was going to end in 1873, where in the state did they go to get prepared? Well, the answer is Kings Island, an island in the middle of the Connecticut River. Next week on Amazing Tales, wait until you hear the story about this group's prediction about the end of the world and how it played out for them. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe, and please stay healthy.